Devlin.
Hello, I'm Janos Di-Fanteria. This film is dedicated to all those who lost their lives, those who lost loved ones, and all those affected by violence and trauma during the long history of troubles in Northern Ireland. Captain, retired, Ian S. Fielding, BA Honours, Kings, writing as Janos Di-Fanteria. Nec aspera terrent. Difficulties be damned. When I told the people of Northern Ireland that I was an atheist, a woman in the audience stood up and said, "Yes, but is it the God of the Catholics or the God of the Protestants in whom you don't believe?" Quentin Crisp. The ultimate test of a moral society is the kind of world that it leaves to its children. Dietrich Bonhoeffer. If one could only teach the English how to talk and the Irish how to listen, society here would be quite civilized. Oscar Wilde.
The ghost of Eamon Devlin.
Oh, the fog rolls down from the morn peaks, and the sparrows whisper low of a shadow walking through the mist, where the old brave spirits go. They say he stood beside the fire when the city burned that night, and when the embers filled the sky, he vanished from their sight. When strangers came through country lanes and fear walked every door, a phantom band rose from the hills to fight and fade once more. A single rifle broke the dawn, its echo crossed the land. They found the tracks, they found the fire, but never found the man. Through 50 winters cold and hard, through 50 summers rain, the old songs carried on the wind across the fields again. A shadow crossed the border roads, a ghost beside the brook. The hunters searched through snow and ice, but only shadows took. But who has seen a steady hand or looked into his eye? He moves just like the autumn smoke beneath the winter sky. From harbor walls to northern hills, the lonely watch he'll keep. Oh, Eamon Devlin walks the night while all the world sleeps. Then came the years of smoke and fire, when city bled and burned. The streets were lit by shattered dreams, and neighbors never returned. They say he held the narrow line until the morning sun, then faded back into the dark before the day had come. Behind the walls of stone and steel, where hope was hard to find, the whisper traveled cell to cell and strengthened weary minds. They swear he walked the midnight halls, a spirit passing through, to tell the lost and lonely souls the dawn would come anew. But who has seen his steady hand or looked into his eye? He moves just like the autumn smoke beneath the winter sky. From harbor walls to northern hills, the lonely watch he'll keep. Oh, Eamon Eamon Devlin walks the night while all the world sleeps. Deep among the border hills, where hidden rivers flow, a phantom moved through mist and rain where few would choose to go. The old man lowered down their voice whenever he drew near, for legends walk a different road than ordinary fear. Now years roll on like winter seas, and seasons drift away. The young men age, the old men fade, the world forgets the day. But still the ghost moves through the fog, a shadow none can hold, a timeless thread of memory, and never grows old, for none have seen his steady hand. But who has seen his steady hand, or looked into his eye? He moves just like the autumn smoke beneath the winter sky. From harbor walls to northern hills, the lonely watch he'll keep. Oh, Eamon Devlin walks the night while all the world sleeps.
The ghost of Eamon Devlin.
Drummintee, South Armagh, the 14th of May, 1977. The air inside the 3 steps inn was thick with the suffocating holy trinity of a South Armagh border pub. Stale Players No. 6 tobacco smoke, the damp wall of rain-soaked donkey jackets, and the heavy sweet iron tang of settling stout. It was a Saturday night in Bandit country. Outside, the shadow of Slieve Gullion loomed like a sleeping beast over Drummintee. Inside, the crowd was defensive, tight-lipped, and deeply suspicious of anyone who didn't match the local dirt on the roads. Up near the small makeshift stage, a man stood. He called himself Danny McElane. He claimed he was a motor mechanic, an official IRA lad on the run from the high-rises of Ardoyne up in Belfast. He wore the jeans, he wore the jacket, and he had an intense, almost frantic swagger that felt just a fraction too polished for a man running for his life. He had already sung one rebel song to warm the room, his Oxford-educated English tongue flattened into a practised, gritty Belfast hall. But the locals in the snug weren't buying it. The whispers had already begun. The eyes in the dark corners were narrowing. They knew what a Belfast man looked like, and they knew what a soldier looked like. Sensing the cold draft of suspicion hardening in the room, the man, Captain Robert Nairac of the Grenadier Guards, gripped the microphone tight. His knuckles were white, and he needed a shield. He needed a song that proved he belonged to the myth. "This one," Nairac announced into the smoke, his Belfast mask slipping back over his teeth. "It's for the old hands, the ones who never left the ditch, for Eamon Devlin." A guitar chord struck, slow and funerary, dragging the upbeat melody of the Boys of the Old Brigade down into something dark, dripping and ghostly. Nairac began to sing. His voice was good, hauntingly good, and it filled the cramped pub, bouncing off the damp wallpaper, and the framed pictures of dead hunger strikers.
The ghost of Eamon Devlin.
At the very back of the room, near the heavy wooden fire door that led to the gravel car park, a man sat alone. He didn't wear a donkey jacket. He wore a faded, oil-stained wax coat that smelled of gorse and gun oil. His cap was pulled low, casting a shadow across a face that no living person outside of 3 men in a farmhouse in South Armagh could identify. Eamon Devlin raised his pint of Guinness. His hand was perfect.
Oh, the fog rolls down from the morn peaks, and the sparrows whisper low of a shadow walking through the mist, where the old brave spirits go.
The pub crowd joined in on the chorus, their voices rising 6 pints deep, fueled by the alcohol and the romantic permanence of a mortal rebel.
But who has seen his steady hand or looked into his eye? He moves just like the autumn smoke beneath a winter sky. From harbour walls to northern hills, the lonely watch he'll keep. Oh, Eamon Devlin walks the night while all the world sleeps.
They sang to the myth. They sang to the ghost. They looked at the handsome, sweating singer on the stage, completely unaware that the real ghost was sitting 10 feet behind them, watching the door. Nairac closed his eyes as he hit the verse about border campaigns. He was an intelligence officer. He knew the file on Devlin. He knew the British Army database listed the name as a composite codename, a ghost manufactured by the provisionals to hide a rotating cell of elite assassins. Nairac believed he was singing a fable. From the back of the room, Eamon Devlin watched the singer's eyes closed. He looked past Nairac towards the front windows. He saw the subtle, heavy movement of 3 local men slipping out into the darkness of the car park. He saw the way they glanced back at the stage with murder in their eyes. They knew the singer wasn't from Ardoyne. They knew what he was. Devlin set his pint glass down on the scratched formica table. It was still half full. He didn't look at Nairac again. He didn't need to. The young British captain was already a dead man walking. He just hadn't stopped singing yet. As Nairac swelled his chest for the final lingering chorus,
Devlin walks the night while all the world sleeps.
the man at the back stood up. He pushed the fire door open just an inch. The bitter, damp night air of South Armagh cut through the pub's heat, carrying the scent of wild turf and rain. The door clicked shut. Nobody saw him go. Nobody ever did. On stage, Robert Nairac finished the song to a scattering of tense, heavy applause. He wiped the sweat from his forehead, stepped off the stage, and walked out into the gravel car park, where iron bars and the back of a Ford Cortina were waiting for him. It was the last song he would ever sing.
But who has seen his steady hand or looked into his eye? He moves just like the autumn smoke beneath a winter sky. From harbor walls to northern hills, the lonely watch he'll keep. Oh, Eamon Devlin walks the night while all the world would sleep.
It was October 1974, in a room above a South Boston tavern, with the smell of stale ale and boiled cabbage seeped through the floorboards. Michael Dwyer, who had left the shipyard in Quincy 3 years earlier with a bad lung and a box of old broadsheet verses, did not know why the courier had chosen him. The man had come from New York on the evening train, his coat smelling of coal smoke, his hat pulled low enough to shade his eyes. He had placed $300 in crisp federal notes on the table beside the ink pot.
No names that can be found in a church registry,
the courier had said. His voice was flat, dry, stripped of any theatrical Boston rhetoric.
No street numbers in Belfast. The man wants a song that makes him everywhere, so he's nowhere.
Dwyer rolled the cheap paper into the carriage. He did not think about the Dublin Parliament or the bombs on Hooker Street. He thought about the rhythm of the old street ballads, the simple, repetitive cadence that could be carried by a drunk or a schoolboy without a piano. He wrote the verse about the GPO, then the line about the border campaign. By the time he reached the third verse, he had inflated Eamon Devlin into an immortal ghost who walked through concrete walls and vanished before the sunrise. It was perfect operational camouflage. By making him folklore, the song turned him into a romantic fable, a mathematical impossibility. When a regular volunteer sat next to a quiet, scar-faced man in a Portadown pub while a drunkard sang the ghost of Eamon Devlin, nobody looked for the flesh and blood target. They were looking for a spirit. Dwyer pulled the sheet from the typewriter, his cough rattling dry in his chest. He would never see the man. He would never understand that he had just manufactured the ultimate security screen for a master assassin. On the 11th of October 1984, the wind off the English Channel brought a thin, greasy salt crust to the windows of the Grand Hotel in Brighton. Devlin sat in a parked Ford Cortina 3 streets behind the seafront, his thumbs resting on the steering wheel. Patrick McGee's long-delay timer was behind the bath panel in room 629. Devlin knew it was there. The intelligence had come through the South Armagh transport pipeline 3 weeks previously. Thatcher's death in 1984 would have destabilised the endgame parameter. The grid must remain rigid. The global calculation engineered by the Equus Bellici was rigid. The violent death of Margaret Thatcher in 1984 would fracture the British security architecture in chaotic, unmanageable ways. Devlin looked at the dashboard clock. The Westminster handle link was open. He had exactly 3 minutes to pass the code word that would clear the building. His hand stayed on the wheel. His fingers did not move towards the radio link. The roar of the 4x2 gelignite charge tore through the night, a dull, thunderous shock that brought the brickwork off the upper 5 stories crashing down into the foyer. By May 1987, the SAS operational planning room at Northern Ireland and Lisbon was a grid of sterile fluorescent light and plastic overlay maps. Devlin had met his MI6 handler in a disused creamery outside Moy. He did not bring documents. He spoke with the flat administrative economy of a ledger clerk. The East Tyrone Brigade will use a digger with a bucket bomb, Devlin said. He did not look at the officer's notepad. 8 men. Liner, McKerney, the rest. They take the Loughgall station at 8 o'clock on the 8th. The sacrifice of the East Tyrone unit was not a betrayal born of weakness. It was ruthless, structural engineering. The 8 men who formed the core of a brigade were hardline militarists, ideological purists who would violently resist the upcoming 1990s ceasefire and the political pivot. To shape the movement for standing down, the radicals had to be systematically purged from the board. On the evening of the 8th of May, the SAS crossfire at Loughgall lasted less than 3 minutes. 80 rounds of 5.56 ammunition tore through the cab of the digger, killing the entire unit before a single detonator could be struck.
Devlin did not attend the funerals in Tyrone, and 3 days later, an anonymous wreath of white lilies arrived at the cemetery gate without a card.
The machine malfunctioned on the 8th of November 1987, when the No. 4 unit detonated the unsanctioned bomb at the Remembrance Sunday ceremony in Enniskillen, killing 11 civilians beneath the rubble of the reading rooms. Devlin's reaction was entirely devoid of human conscience. His rage was driven purely by operational logic. The horror of Enniskillen turned global public opinion, even within the Irish Republic, violently against the provisional movement, single-handedly derailing Devlin's political stabilisation strategy and setting his timeline back by 2 critical years. The cleansing was immediate. The rogue operators responsible for the unsanctioned strike were not arrested by the RUC. They were systematically hunted down through the barns of South Armagh by the Nutting Squad. Frankie Scapio executed the internal purge with a blunt, clinical violence that left 3 bodies in a drainage ditch outside Jonesborough. Devlin signed no papers, left no paper trail, and spoke no names to the Dublin executive. The stain was scrubbed.
But who has seen his steady hand or looked into his eye? He moves just like the autumn smoke beneath a winter sky. From harbour walls to northern hills, the lonely watch he'll keep. Oh, Eamon Devlin walks the night while all the world sleeps.
"80 years of iron war." The smoke inside the pub just off the Falls Road did not drift towards the ceiling ventilation. It hung in a static yellow layer 3 inches above the framed photographs of the 1981 hunger strikers. It was October 1993. The bearded singer on the low timber platform near the cigarette machine was in his late 60s, wearing a checked rural shirt with a faded dark green woolen sweater over it. His fingers moving across the rusted strings of an acoustic guitar with an irregular, aggressive rhythm. His voice was raw from the damp air of the lower falls, carrying the familiar, repetitive cadence that had been manufactured 19 years before in a room above a South Boston tavern. He hit the final chord of the chorus, letting the low E string vibrate against the laminate wood of the stage. "To the ghost," a man at the centre table said. He didn't shout. He raised a pint of stout towards the stage, his fingers stained with tobacco and grease from the taxi garage down the street. The room followed him, a dozen glasses rising in the dim light of the snug. They sang it as folklore, a romantic piece of history to be kept in the pocket, while the local commanders turned over the keys to the arms dumps and the civil servants in Dublin drafted the final administrative annexures of the ceasefire. To them, the song was the proof that they had survived the long watch. They genuinely believed the 80 years of iron war had been won on the bricks of Hooker Street and the roads of South Armagh. The small corner table beside the emergency exit was empty, A single pint glass sat on the scarred timber. The foam inside dried into a series of thin grey rings around the rim. The chair was turned slightly towards the door, as if the occupant had stepped out during the second verse, while the singer was description-free, inflating the legend into something that could walk through concrete walls. Nobody looked at the empty space. Nobody noticed that the scar-faced man, the man with the perfectly groomed black hair and the piercing hazel eyes, who had sat there since the first patrol turned onto Sackville Street, was no longer in the building. He had not been there for some time. The myth was sufficient. The myth was the cover, and the cover was the operation. Outside, the rain over Belfast did not drop in clean sheets. It came in a persistent, greasy mist that turned the brickwork of the gable walls the colour of wet slate. The black taxis moved with a low hiss through the puddles near the Divis Flats, their solid axles clattering over the iron gully grates. The territory was not yet finished with itself. The localised background noise was fading into the necessary synthetic silence, clearing the international intelligence grids for the massive financial and systemic manoeuvres waiting 3,000 miles to the west. The silence had been manufactured, paid for in brass and leaden thuds, and delivered to the master table at Dudhope Castle. The wind from the Divis mountain blew a handful of wet chip wrappers down the lane, slapping them against the corrugated iron of the army peace line before vanishing into the grey fog of the boundary.
But who has seen his steady hand or looked into his eye? He moves just like the autumn smoke beneath the winter sky. From harbour walls to northern hills, the lonely watch he'll keep. Oh, Eamon Devlin walks the night while all the world sleeps.
So, who was Eamon Devlin? Well, the simple answer is that he never existed, at least not in history. Eamon Devlin is an ORSUS character, but almost everything surrounding him in the story was deliberately constructed from the landscape, personalities, and documented events of the Troubles. And this particular landscape is not one I came across through books. As a young infantry officer, I first encountered Northern Ireland early in 1990 when my battalion, the 1st Battalion, the King's Regiment, deployed there for a 2-year tour. We were based on the north coast at Ballykelly, near Limavady, and served as the Brigade Reserve. That meant we went almost everywhere. We deployed into every city and almost every village in the province. We came to know its roads and border crossings, its mountains and towns, and most importantly, its people and personalities. In 1995, I returned to the province once more. This time it was for a 6-month tour of duty based at Besbrook Mill in South Armagh, where I served as the battalion intelligence officer. A great many factual events, experiences and observations from both of those tours have been subsequently woven into the fiction that is ORSUS. Northern Ireland is an extraordinarily beautiful place, but in 1990, beauty and violence could exist uncomfortably close together. And towards the end of the further of our tour, that reality came home to the battalion in the most devastating way imaginable. At 4 minutes after 4 on the morning of 24th of October 1990, Victor 2 checkpoint stood on the Buncrana Node near Coshquin, a border crossing point in Londonderry. Earlier that night, a civilian named Patrick "Patsy" Gillespie had been taken from his home. His family were held at gunpoint, and he was chained into a blue Toyota Hiace van containing more than £1,000 of homemade explosive. He was ordered to drive it to the checkpoint. He had been told that the soldiers there would cut him free and that there would be time for everyone to reach safety. There wasn't. As the soldiers attempted to extricate Patsy from the vehicle, the bomb was remotely detonated. Patsy Gillespie and 5 members of my battalion were killed. Lance Corporal Stephen Burrows, Kingsman Stephen Roy Beecham, Kingsman Vincent John Paul Scott, Kingsman David Andrew Sweeney, and Kingsman Paul Desmond Worrell, and Patsy Gillespie, a civilian who had been forced into something over which he had no control. 6 lives, 6 families, and countless others who carried what happened at Victor 2 with them afterwards. So alongside everyone who lost their life, lost someone they loved, or was otherwise affected by the violence and trauma of the Troubles, this film is dedicated particularly to those 5 brave Kingsmen and 1 equally brave civilian. Nec aspera terrent, difficulties be damned. And perhaps that personal connection is also why, when I brought ORSUS into Northern Ireland, I didn't want to rewrite the history. I wanted the fiction to walk quietly beside it. Because Robert Nairac was real, the Brighton bombing was real, Patrick McGee was real, Loughgall was real, and Enniskillen was horribly real. The border campaign, South Armagh, the hunger strikes, the intelligence war, and the long political journey towards ceasefire all belong to history. What doesn't belong to history is the man quietly walking between them, Eamon Devlin. He wasn't sitting at the back of the 3 Steps Inn while Robert Nairac sang. There was no Michael Dwyer in South Boston, commissioned to manufacture the ghost of Eamon Devlin. Devlin didn't sit behind the wheel of a Ford Cortina in Brighton, deciding whether to warn the Grand Hotel. He didn't betray the East Tyrone Brigade to British intelligence at Loughgall. Didn't manipulate the consequences of Enniskillen. Those things belong to ORSUS. But that is where the experiments become somewhat interesting. Because how do you create a man whom history cannot disprove? You don't give him monuments, and you don't give him photographs. You don't give him signed orders. You give him absence. A codename becomes a rumour becomes a story becomes a song. And once enough people know the song, something peculiar happens. The absence of evidence no longer weakens the legend, it strengthens it. That is why, throughout this film, we almost never quite see Eamon Devlin. A coat, a cap, a hand around a pint, a figure disappearing through a door, and eventually an empty chair. Because the real subject of the ghost of Eamon Devlin isn't whether one extraordinary man secretly controlled history. It's how easily history can acquire a ghost. The files will say one thing, the song says another. And somewhere between them, Eamon Devlin became a legend. Whether the legend concealed a man, a name, a network, or something else entirely, well, that belongs in ORSUS. And ghosts notoriously do very little paperwork. This film combines authentic historical photographs with visual representations created to illustrate the narrative. And it is dedicated to all those who lost their lives, those who lost loved ones, and all those affected by violence and trauma during the Troubles in Northern Ireland. I am Janos Di-Fanteria, and this is ORSUS.